Hello, I'm Eric Hammond. I'm going to go ahead and apologize for the incredibly low quality of this video, but I have my off-grid water system that I just kind of want to share with you guys and get this system out. Before I start, I'm going to go ahead and show you the different components, and then we'll talk about kind of each one of them individually. Here is the actual well casing that goes into the ground. It's a 465-foot hole. I have my switch that controls it on and off. I've got a plug-in that I can switch between DC and AC. I have a large water storage tank that holds 500 gallons of water, so I store water on the surface. I have my pressure tank. I have a pump that pressurizes my water. I have 2 water filters. I have an overflow from my tank that runs outside. And then I have a manifold that distributes my water. That's my inside bit. The overflow out of my water tank comes out of the side of the building and it runs down the side of the building. I have options to where I can actually open this, I can take this off, and I can direct water flow out of that by controlling that valve. I keep that capped most of the time when I don't need water up here. And I run it down the side of the building, and then I discharge right here in the corner into this 325 gallon tank. From there, I have a hose that will run out, and then it just runs over to a pond and discharges into the pond. So it's constantly pumping water as long as the sun's shining. And I discharge over there into the pond, and then I just fill the pond with that water. Here are the 4 solar panels that run the well pump. There is 1,000 watts worth of power here. These are a monocrystalline panel. They're all facing south. The angle seems to be pretty unimportant. I really like these monocrystalline panels. They are extremely efficient in low lighting conditions. I can pump water when there is 0 sunshine. Like if it is super cloudy, there's no sun out, I can still pump 2 cups a minute basically. So I can still get water out of the ground even when the sun's really not there. They are a special panel. They're a very high voltage panel. These are 50 volt panels. I have them all wired in series to 200 volts. When the sun is shining on them, if you were to touch the wire, it would electrocute you and it would kill you. There's a significant amount of voltage there, and it's at like 6 or 7 amps. There's a lot of power coming from these panels. Those panels run inside to my well pump. So let's go back inside. We're back inside. I've kind of showed you the components to the system. Let's talk about it a little bit more in detail. What I have is a well. It was drilled, probably 3 or 4 years ago. It's 465 feet deep. Before that time, I had been hauling water in by hand. I lived in a tiny house. I used just very little water at a time. Hauling it in, water is very heavy, obviously. I had the well drilled. There was no building here. And I had a simple pump, hand pump installed. So then I was able to pump water by hand. And that was a pretty big thing for me, because then I could really use as much water as I could pump. So that was kind of cool. It's a significant amount of work pumping water out of the ground by hand. To fill a 5-gallon bucket, it could take 5 minutes. The water level, the static water level in this well is at 150 feet when it is the most dry. That is how much lift or how much pressure you have to overcome to get the water out of the hole. I have measured this well when it has rained a whole lot, and the water level is at like 90 feet. And then when it was in a very big drought, it was at 150 feet. After a 12-inch rain in one day, in 24 hours, I ended up pumping water by hand with just my finger on the well pump. Like, the water level must have rose significantly. I had installed the simple pump motor that runs their well pump, and I would fill this storage tank, and it pumped very slow. It would pump like a gallon a minute. But as long as you're storing water in a large tank, like a 500-gallon tank, it doesn't matter if it pumps slow because you can just pump water continuously all day. That system sucked. It was a super loud pump. It didn't work really well, and it ended up failing on me. So I upgraded my system. I researched what was the best pumps out there. I knew I wanted to do a solar type of pump. I wanted to have water reliability. I'd been in a situation before where I had no water. I had to haul it in, and I didn't want to be without water again. What I found through my research was the best pump that I could buy is called a Grundfos SQ Flex pump. They sell them in varying gallons per minute. I bought the one that was 6 gallons per minute because I had not been able to talk to anyone who had done any of these types of installations before. I had to basically read the technical manual, and I was judging based on the amperage draw of that pump in the technical specifications that would be about the most I could run. After getting that pump here and installing it in the well, I actually measured the amperage draw at half of what they were claiming. I hooked it up to a kilowatt meter, and when the well pump is running off of an AC voltage, it was pulling like 400 to 450 watts, which was half of what they claimed. So I actually could have installed a 13 gallon a minute pump, the next size larger, and I would have been fine. So I would do that in the future if this one were to fail. This pump is very interesting in that it is a 2-wire pump, but it can run off of AC voltage or it can run off of DC voltage. You can run it off of 110 volts AC, depending on what the water level is. You can run it off of 220 volts AC. You can hook a generator up to it. You can run that pump. Or you can hook it up to DC voltage, which is what I am doing currently. I actually have a plug that I can switch. I used a stove plug, just a stove plug you can buy at Lowe's so that I wouldn't confuse and accidentally plug something into 200 volts DC that's coming from my panels. So basically, we got the pump. My family and I installed the pump in the hole. It's very easy to do. You can install a well pump yourself. It's not a big deal. You don't need a massive truck to install these. You can do them by hand. I put the pump at 300 feet. So I have a 150-foot cushion there of water. The well refreshes at a rate of 30 gallons per minute. My pump is 6 gallons per minute, so I will never overcome that. I have a special switch over here that I can turn the well pump on and off with. Grundfos sells this switch. It is very important that you buy their switch. When we have 110 volt or 120 volt, switches in a house, like a light switch, and we turn those on and off, when you turn it off, for a split second, there's an electrical arc between the two contacts. Because it is an AC voltage, you are producing a sine wave. As that sine wave passes past zero, the arc is extinguished and the switch closes and the switch opens, and the contacts do not weld themselves closed. With DC high voltages, there is potential for a switch to weld the contacts closed. If you were to turn a switch off, the contacts inside of it would arc, and those could actually arc and weld close together, and then you would not be able to turn the device off. This special Grundfos switch is capable of disconnecting a 300 volt circuit under load, which is a pretty big deal. They do that by having 3 heavy duty switches in line, and you actually break all of them open at once. So not one single switch or one single set of contacts is responsible for opening that circuit. So it's very important to buy their switch. So my panels come in, they send 200 volts DC down to the bottom of this hole, and then that starts pumping water to the surface. The cool thing about this pump is on AC voltage, if I were to plug this into 110, the pump runs at full speed. It will pump 6 gallons per minute. On DC voltage, when I have it hooked up to 99% of the time, there is a maximum power point tracking device inside of that pump. It will vary the speed of the well pump and control how much water comes out of it based on the amount of available light outside. So if we have a very bright sunny day, the pump will run full speed. It will pump 6 gallons per minute out of the hole and into this tank. If it is a very low light condition, it will continue to pump, but it pumps very slowly. And like I told you, in very low light conditions, like I have a separate solar system for my house, they use a polycrystalline panel. On days where I cannot charge my batteries because these polycrystalline panels cannot produce any electricity to charge my house system, my well pump still is running and will produce at least 2 cups of water per minute, which is kind of a big deal. You're not going to go thirsty if you can pump 2 cups of water a minute. All of that water gets stored in this giant 500-gallon water tank behind me. That is incredibly important. My discharge hose outside, it froze. There's one dip in it, so water sat there overnight. It's winter, water froze in it. So the water going outside the building and that gets directed to the pond, I couldn't pump water outside. I have 500 gallons, so I decided I don't actually need to pump. So I shut the pump off for several days. So we take our showers, whatnot. My wife and I are pretty conservative about water. We don't use a whole lot of it. I knew how hard it was to get, so I kind of don't try and waste it. But my neighbor's well, just down the road, his well quit. He couldn't pump any water. He had water, but it was 400 feet at the bottom of the hole. So he had to come over and borrow water from me. And it's like, yeah, take as much as you want. After he was done taking as much water as he wanted, and I was using as much water as I wanted, after 2 days of not pumping, I got down to like 350 gallons. So I have plenty of water to share. It is a fantastic idea to store your water on the surface. I don't know why well systems rely on that pump being 100% operational all the time, so you have no water storage. It is a good idea to store this on the surface. This is your battery basically for your well system. When it's nighttime and you can't pump water, you have 500 gallons here, so it doesn't matter. It's a good idea to store it on the surface in case of emergencies or a mechanical failure. If my well pump failed, I have 500 gallons that I have to go through, and that will give me plenty of time to get my well repaired, to pull this pipe out and put a new well pump in or whatever has gone wrong with the system. I've got plenty of storage. There isn't an actual emergency. From the well pump into the tank, I've stored my 500 gallons. Over here, coming out of the tank, I have a line that runs up right here, that runs up to a water filter. This water filter, the first one, is just like a cotton spun string water filter. That runs over to a SureFlow 45 PSI on-demand pump. Puts out 3 gallons per minute. That is a 24 volt pump. That pump is separate from the solar panels you saw outside. This pump runs off of my house solar system. I have a second water filter. Oh wow, there's a lot of spider webs there. Sorry about that. I told you there'd be poor quality. I have a second water filter. There's a carbon filter in that one. Out of that pipe, or out of that filter, comes a pipe all the way down and into this 20-gallon pressure tank. So I store 20 gallons of water under pressure. That on-demand pump can keep up with it, but I tend to just store it in this pressure tank to give myself a little bit of leeway. And then I have a pressure gauge down there so you can see how much pressure is actually inside of it. So right now we're sitting at like 50 psi. When you take showers and stuff, it's not that much water pressure. From there, I have it to this manifold here. This manifold is a completely unnecessary object. It's super expensive and you don't need it. But I have my cold water coming in. I have a cold out that runs over to a water heater, and then my hot water comes back in. And then each of these individual pipes you see run to different things. Like that one runs outside to the hoses. This one's going to be to the kitchen sink and the laundry. That one's the shop sink. So you can turn off each one of these individually, and that's kind of neat. If I were to do this again, I would not use this system. They make this PEX is really cool pipe to work with. You just crimp these fittings together and you can start putting pipe together very easily. They make a fitting that's 3/4 on both sides, and it's a T, and the T coming out of it is a 1/2 inch. So if I were to do this again, I would just run a 3/4 inch pipe all the way down the wall. I would crimp those T fittings into it, and then each T fitting, I could have a ball valve attached to it, and then I would run each ball valve to a separate circuit in the house. This pump is extremely loud. I don't really like it. If I were to do this again, when this pump fails, I am going to take and buy a 110 volt well pump, like a deep well pump. And I am going to put it inside of this tank, and I'm going to lay it on its side at the very bottom, and then I will have a pressure switch on the pressure tank, and that will work very well. It would be a quiet pump, and then you could bump your water pressure up to 50 or 60 psi very easily, and it would not cause any problems. So I think I'm going to do that in the future. As far as the water heater goes, I have it over here on the wall. It's an on-demand water heater. It just runs off of propane. It works really awesome. This one's a Takagagi, I don't know. It seems like a Japanese type of really good water heater. You can control the temperature of the water there. We ran this before I installed all the propane lines off of just those 15-pound barbecue bottles. You can buy on Amazon a 2-stage regulator that screws right into a barbecue bottle, which is a 15-pound container, and it has a 3/8 fitting coming out of it. So I used a 3/8 pipe nipple, and then I just adapted it up to 3/4, and I used this same gas hose, and then I just ran that off of that 15-pound container. That 15-pound container, which is roughly 3.3 gallons of propane, it's not very much propane. I was able to, for my wife and I, to take showers for 25 days-ish. We did not go through that much propane. I think that's it for about right in here. Let's go back outside. I was going to take you back outside, but the ducks are extremely noisy, and I don't think that I would be able to talk and have you guys hear me at the same time. So, this system has been running for a year. It is a pretty robust system. I have had some major drawbacks. One, I did not have an overflow on this tank. I would rely, like I have a gauge here that I can see the water level in. As the water level drops, it drops in this tube, so you can kind of see with it and the markings on the tank how many gallons you have. I was kind of just running the well pump, and I would fill the tank up every couple days and I would shut it off. Well, with human nature and the way I am, I would forget to turn it off. Without having an overflow, that is an extremely bad thing. Water will come shooting out of the top, and it will fill your shop up with hundreds of gallons of water if you do not remember to shut that off. I flooded my shop out probably 3 different times before I decided that I needed an overflow. The overflow is awesome. It worked really great. Now I can pump water every single day. I don't have to turn the switch off. I just leave it on. The tank is always full, and then the water that fills up too much just goes outside and goes into the pond, so I don't have to worry about it. That worked super great, but I ended up overflowing my water tank again. I had a screen that was on the end of this pipe outside where it dumps into the 300-gallon barrel. That screen frosted one morning. It had pumped the water the night before. It frosted. That frost was not allowing water out, and then water overflowed into it and all over the floor. So I had to open up the shop doors and sweep it all out, but it was cold outside, so that was not a good thing. So I kind of have to think about what I'm going to do there. The other disadvantage that I have found, but it actually seems like a blessing in disguise, is this tank sweats. In the summertime, the humidity in here is very high. That tank will start sweating very, very badly. Like, it actually leaks all over the floor. Like, all these white spots around it, you can see that is where water just condensates on the tank and then just runs out around it. There's actually a very significant amount. It's like, wow, that's a big problem, but that's not. Basically, what I have here is an air conditioner, and I just didn't know it. So, I'm pumping water all day. The water coming out of the ground is 50 to 60 degrees, somewhere in that range. What I am going to do to solve my condensation problem is I'm going to tap into this pipe. They make livestock tank floats, like for watering your cattle. You can put a float in this tank. The tank is capable of shutting off, or not the tank, I'm sorry. The switch, the livestock float switch, is capable of shutting off up to 100 psi. So, I'm going to come out of this elbow with a T. Water will flow into this tank until the tank is full. Once it is full, the livestock float will come up, it will shut off this passage. At that point, from my T, I'm going to come out, and right here by the well, I am going to put a radiator. That radiator will have a fan on it, and that fan will blow 50 to 60 degree air in this shop as long as the sun is shining. It is blowing 50 degree air. That air is also condensing on the radiator, and when it is condensing on the radiator, it is removing humidity from the atmosphere. I can actually air condition this shop probably 55 to 60 degrees, and it would be basically free. I already have all the components here. So I'm definitely going to implement that. If you have any other questions, please leave me a comment. I can go in depth into any more of these that you would like. Again, I did all the well install system myself. I designed the system myself. I've done everything myself. I've done the research. So I should be able to help you if you have any questions or concerns. But thank you for listening to my poor quality video, and I hope you have a fantastic day.